Hello and welcome to the CMIP panel debate number 4. Today we're talking about software-defined networking and the next generation of the data center. With me I have an expert panel from left to right. I have Jack Lemonck from Broadpeak, Mike Beattie from Mediamano, Jason Sherwood from Equinix, and Peter Guglielmino
Close enough.
from IBM.
Thank you.
As many of us will realize that the sheer volume of content and the size of some of the services that are now delivering content to consumers across the globe is growing at a rapid rate. Services that a few years ago may have had 20 or 30,000 subscribers now have hundreds, if not millions of subscribers. It's an ecosystem where data and bandwidth and content is forcing operators to look at new ways to deliver that network operation layer. It's a very complex area. To give a slight background, when I was first in the broadcast industry about 20-something years ago, everything was SDI, everything was proprietary, everything was tapes being loaded onto a back of a taxi and drive into an edit. The world today is not like that. The world today is IP-driven, as this pavilion demonstrates. So I'm going to ask Jack, the IP revolution. When I say to you software-defined networks, what is a software-defined network?
So software-defined network, to keep it simple, is really the idea of separating the control plane and the data plane. And that's something that we've done from the beginning on our side, because we are an independent software vendor. We provide a video delivery technology to different telecom operators, cable company, content providers. And from the start, we had this software approach, and we decided already to separate the control and data plane. Because data plane for us, because we do video streaming, is more about high-performance streaming servers, caching servers, and the control is more like about establishing the session, controlling the rights and everything. So from the start, we kind of separated these two, and it makes it a natural fit for software-defined networks. Then NFV comes with the virtualization and the scalability. And the scalability for us is very important for video streaming, because if you consider like the Olympics, you need a lot of capacity. And then after the Olympics is gone, so you need to fold all this capacity back. So having a software approach, we have been very happy with the development of SDN and NFV, because for us it's a good occasion to offer a component that can scale up and down and be truly elastic.
So the simplistic view of separating the control plane and the data plane, I understand.
Yep.
Mike, how would you say, if you had to speak to a customer about why they should look at next generation data center technologies, what are the key benefits, and maybe what are some of the limitations?
I think you have to begin by understanding the situation that a lot of people start from. They start from a situation where things were very defined, and the equipment that they bought had its functionality well defined as well. That was possible because the nature of what customers were consuming from those networks was relatively constant and stable. But we know now that situation is changing quite a lot. It's separating out in such a way that clients are looking for services that are being provided by content providers that really just aren't practical or feasible with that kind of technology, that kind of structure, that architecture, it just doesn't work for those kind of services. And of course, the new kind of services that people are looking for, which are based on CDNs, streaming, viewing in multiple screens, that are not appropriate for those kind of networks, are absolutely appropriate for the software-driven concepts that you said and the data-centric concepts that you said. And so all of a sudden these become the new reference points for anybody who's interested in either being a provider or a consumer in those. These new abilities are not providable with the traditional network approaches, and they need the new ones to be able to do it.
Okay. I mean, a lot of this technology is buried away in data centers. The irony for our industry is that all the razzmatazz is on the screen, all the content delivery is in a rack, buried away somewhere else. Jason, you guys have a lot of data centers.
Quite a lot.
Are you having discussions with broadcasters who are saying, we can't scale our channel, we can't scale our subscriber base? we can't scale our network. Are those conversations happening?
They're beginning to happen, and it's all around the scalability, and as has been mentioned, scalability and flexibility. If you think about it, the peaks and troughs of the workflow, there's nothing more peaks and trophy than really this industry. So if you can reconfigure a network on the fly or between one project and the next, so you're not just wasting infrastructure, I see that being a great advantage for the industry with utilizing the SDN technology to be able to do that.
Is it well known though? Because we walk around a show like this and SDN is not on billboards. Cloud might well be, and 4K most certainly is, but there's not that much talk about the next generation of the data center.
No, you're right. I mean, the cloud's an interesting piece because obviously, cloud is everywhere and is a big topic of conversation. And really, SDN dovetails quite well into that. I mean, some of the work we do with enterprises is giving them SDN-controlled access into the various clouds and allow that flexibility to use some Microsoft, some Amazon, some Google, some this, that, the other, some IBM software. So providing some of that control of picking off different types of resources when they need them. So there's definitely some movement there, but yes, it's not a sexy topic for sure.
IBM is an interesting company because you guys have fingers in many pies, to be polite.
Yeah.
But one of those pies is that you've got some R&D teams
Yes.
and development teams who are looking at these technologies at a very fundamental basis. What's
Yes.
your view?
So clearly this whole topic of virtualization becomes an important aspect. And when we're talking about cloud or software-defined networks, the biggest advantage is you get to ride the technology curve from the whole IT industry. So if you look at the broadcast industry, there's a relatively fixed set of suppliers and people who are developing research and technology. But when you start looking across the entire spectrum of IT manufacturers and folks developing research and technology, the Googles, the Amazons, IBMs, Oracles, that's an enormous amount of IP that's being devoted into IT technology. And if you can harness that research and development and apply it to broadcast, now you can start to drive down the cost of your broadcast. You can gain the flexibility and the scalability that's being developed for traditional IT businesses and apply it to broadcast, and the sky becomes the limit. If you look just what happened with over-the-top technology, it's becoming an enormous sea change, right? Broadcasters are looking at this, and in fact, the whole notion around ATSC version 3 is about how do broadcasters get involved in the whole notion around IP and do IP broadcast and start to be able to take advantage of things like delivering objects to TVs and mobile and really get the benefits of what OTT has started and apply that to over-the-air broadcast. So it's a pretty exciting area.
There clearly is a convergence between the IT sector and the broadcast sector. Looking at the names in the halls, many of them are IT companies. I mean, they're just pure IT companies. But the broadcast space has some quite unique challenges. I mean, business data is great and lots of small transactions here and here and there. Let's do some contribution networks from the Super Bowl. Let's see how that works as a flow. Do you see are there any limitations where companies have to think differently about the data center because of the types of content that we're moving around? 4K just around the corner. Jack?
Yeah, so I don't see lots of limits there in terms of what SDN can achieve, and SDN is very well appropriate for like a cloud PVR, for example. So everybody wants to do cloud PVR. So, and actually the question is more, can you do cloud PVR if you don't rely on the SDN infrastructure? If you don't do that, well, it's going to cost you a lot, So it's impossible almost to do it because of the legal requirements and the private copy. SDN is enabling this now, and we're seeing more and more now RFPs that we're getting for people who want to deploy this. So cloud PVR is it's a good one. Live TV, we discussed about it. So it's a good application for it, and especially 4K, because 4K is even more greedy now. So again, like 16, 20 megabits per second. So it's a good way of doing it. Where I see a limit is actually SDN has started to embrace like the virtual CPE. And I see limits there because, of course, it makes a lot of sense. What they're doing, with VCPE, that people are saying, why don't we put, like, instead of having an intelligent box in the home, why don't we put a dumb box, a layer 2 box, and then we do everything in the cloud? But the issue there is that if it's a set-top box, it can be an issue because now we have 4K, so and maybe you have a new format, so you have to anyway to renew that box, or maybe for a cable modem, or maybe for a fiber gateway, you need new Wi-Fi tomorrow, so you want to change that box. So there is also a balance that in some application, even if it feels smart to do it, maybe it's better in some cases, like, and I'm thinking again the CPE, to keep the model of having a distributed smart box instead of like putting everything in the cloud. So,
but it does seem that many broadcasters are not running their own data centers. They're not running their own network infrastructure. They are service providers in their own right
Sure, yeah,
who want to work with services.
Yeah.
When you speak to your customers, and you all have hundreds of customers between you, are they planning to do this stuff themselves, or are they just looking for someone else to make the pain go away?
I think the answer is where do you draw the line as to what they define as themselves and what they define as other people. Excuse me. Most broadcasters have been reliant upon and still are reliant upon vendors to be able to basically deliver their core products. So it's never really been 100% them. They've had to rely on vendors, and you often find vendors, representatives within broadcasters to keep the thing running. The fact that that now gets put out to a data center, to me, is not particularly important to the CTO. The CTO has people who provide him with a minimum level of service in order to be able to deliver what he needs for his customers. There's one other point, though, that I think has not been talked about very much, but is tremendously important. If you think about what you used to consume on television, you used to consume news, you used to consume sports, and you used to consume movies or series or longer form programs, okay? And the great majority of what we talk about when we're talking about virtualization, when we're talking about data centers and software defined, we're talking about people consuming things on devices that are almost always movies, series, and so on and so forth. The point about news is that news is genuinely a broadcast type of activity. It's one source that goes out to many people. And if you think about the Super Bowl or sports, it's very, very similar. You have one source that's going out to very, very many people. And the data center and cloud type model is tremendously inefficient for that.
Very true.
So as that change happens, we see the new things blooming, and we think, oh, this is fantastic, we can do all these new things. But sitting in the background is the basic engineering logic that says, for broadcast, it isn't the best way to do it. And what we haven't seen yet is how that broadcast model will apply with the new data centers and software-defined networks.
It's an absolutely fascinating point that SVOD and on-demand services are so on the lips to everybody because of the likes of Netflix. But when you look at the data, the world still watches linear TV.
Yeah.
Not my son, of course, because he doesn't know how television works. But the world generally still watches linear TV. When you're building data centers out for broadcasters, what's the design ethos? Are they thinking of linear? Are they thinking of SVOD? Are they thinking of today, tomorrow, next year?
Really, the way we look at it and we work with them is to try and give that level of connectivity. If you think about content distribution, getting the next generation of media out, it's always been about getting the content closer to the user. So you think about how Netflix, put their points of presence all over the world in various locations so that you can get closer and closer to their end users so you get the best possible performance on your set-top box. Google, the same kind of thing. But really, so what we're seeing in terms of the best data center fit is those that are well connected to all these various, the user base. How do you get closest to the user base? Because you've got these huge files flying around, you've got this huge amount of content coming around. So being closer as possible to your users gets the best possible picture, latency, all those kind of things get taken out of the equation, the user gets the best experience. So that's where we're seeing from a data center market is trying to get them as close to the user as we can.
Are we getting closer to the user?
Yes, I mean that's one of the reasons we have so many data centers, and that's where we put them where we do. We don't put them in the middle of nowhere in rural Oregon or in the middle of the country. We're putting them in the middle of Silicon Valley, in the middle of LA, in the middle of London, so they're closer to the actual end users. It costs us money in terms of building real estate, but that helps get the edge out.
Does the workflow change? We hope that when technology comes in, it means that things get easier and are transparent, and I don't have to worry about how I'm moving these files. Is the workflow portion as advanced as the technology? I don't know, Peter, do you talk to customers who say, we want this, but we don't want to change the way we work?
Yeah, all the time, and your question is right. Workflow does change dramatically, and it's been changing dramatically, right? Where first we had linear workflow, then file-based workflow, and now we have, multi-cloud workflow. And, one of the major changes is maybe it's not the best idea to move the data to where the compute is. Maybe the best idea is to move the compute to where the data is, right? It's if you think of Docker, right? I could take a small container and move a virtual CDN node out to where the audience is, and maybe that's what I should be doing. Or maybe if I'm doing transcoding, maybe it's easier to package up a transcoder in a Docker container and drop it where the data is instead of moving a multi-terabyte file to where the transcoder is. So clearly, workflow is going to change. And when you add the human aspect to it, what changes is now we have people globally working on assets.
Yeah.
So how does that dramatically changes, right? I have people who are doing creative processing, graphics, review. How do I do that without incurring enormous expense of moving content from place to place? Can I use proxies? So all of that dramatically does change, and it will continue to change.
So last year I met a guy I've known for a number of years who's with he's part of a bigger company. They're launching an OTT service in Europe. And he was here with a remit to basically work out how they could build a system for roughly under $10 a month to compete with the impending arrival of a well-known Netflix, with a well-known company called Netflix. And we were just having a beer and talking, and I said, well, what does your stack look like? What costs what? So our content's about this, and our ops is about this. He had no idea what his network costs were. I know that sounds very strange, very smart guy, because he couldn't work out how much he'd have to scale.
Yep.
If they had this number of subscribers, it was maybe around here. If they grew, they had no idea. And it was almost an impossible question for him to work out in his mind, what could they do and at what price points could they work at? That return on investment, it just seems like the most complex question. When you talk to your customers, they say, well, what do we get back from this investment in new technology and new processes or working with a service provider? Is that a calculation that can be done on a napkin, or is it just how long's a piece of string? And that's a question to any of you. Anyone wants to answer that, you feel free.
Well, I mean, I think it's a pretty radical change, and that's the hard part. It's hard to quantify radical change. I mean, you've got all these various disruptors, like, say, the Netflix factor, the different ways of consuming media, just like you were saying earlier, the way I consume media versus my daughter versus my parents, all completely different. And they're all right, so we have to support all of them. And it is a different, getting away from that linear, siloed kind of flow, where you're just going step by step, and becoming much more flexible. Super Bowl being an exception, but there's much more content and more of an any-to-any, and it is very, very different. And so yeah, I think it's quite a tall order for us all. I don't think we have any answers.
Can you quantify it? Can you sit down and work out with the spreadsheet what it's going to cost for that layer, that network, that data center layer? Is it easy?
Yeah, I think for our application, video delivery, it's pretty easy, because when you put together a system, well, usually you need a CMS, you need a CDN from people like us, but you need also some transcoding, and
this is not sounding easy, Jack. This is sounding...
No, it's different pieces, and it was easy before because they had to have 3 different platforms or 4 different platforms, so they would have to pay for the SLA of all the hardware, for the software, and basically, the transcodings they would do at some point, then they would stop doing transcoding, then they would do the CDN at the peak hours, and the unit would shut down. And then same thing for the content management. Maybe they will do the billing, so they will use a lot of CPU at some point, and then not anymore. Now, even network service provider, instead of getting the appliances for everybody, what they do is that they build a private cloud, and they do the transcoding during the night. They use the CDN. They use the platform for CDN at the peak hour, which is something like 9:55 p.m. or something. So they use the CDN at that time, and they can do the billing, in the morning and they pay the SLA only for that private cloud, so...
But let me use my friend as an example. So they're a substantial broadcaster. They have ops, they have a data center, They have people, they have content. They have a linear television workflow, which they pay for, and is the thing that makes them money. The problem that he has is, he's told, go out and build this service, but please reuse the stuff that we just spent 20 million euros buying. But our industry would say, yes, and I agree with you, we've got these solutions, but those solutions are often standalone, they're often cloud-based. What does it look like for a broadcaster who's trying to marry the old, the invested, the capex with the new? It just seems like a really challenging question.
It is. There's a very, very interesting report that the IABM have done with Devoncroft that members of the IABM have been able to have a look at. And one of the things it talks about in the report is, if you think about subscribers to cable television in the United States, they're paying a fixed amount of money every month. And when they cut the cable, they're not. And for the people who are working in finance and sales, it's really simple when everybody pays the same subscription fee. And then when they stop doing it and they consume publicity on a handheld device for the same thing, from an accountancy point of view, from a sales profitability point of view, it's immensely complicated. And it's just as you say. And the thing that makes it even worse is that the numbers are a lot smaller than when they were on the subscription. So somebody's getting really, really edgy because they're saying, hang on a minute, they're cutting the cords, I'm losing a lot of monthly revenue, and what you're giving me in return is a very large bill for new technology that is enabling me to get a lot less revenue. And I can tell you how much I'm spending, I can tell you how much I'm getting back, and it's a very negative number when I add the two of them together. And it's so the answer to your question is, it's not just cost quantifying all of the different aspects in the stack, it's actually trying to link that into revenues and sales, which is, just as you say, immensely complicated. It's actually even more complicated for me, I think, than the technology challenges to build those networks.
What's the easy stuff? What can people do first? That's the easy next generation data center and SDN step that gets the best return quickest.
I think, in my opinion, I think the easiest thing to do first is to virtualize. So if you can take functions, whether they're transcode or QC or whatever, and virtualize that, then you give yourself the ability to be portable and the ability to deploy, with much lower cost, much more easily. And then maybe the next step on top of that is something like maybe OpenStack. So OpenStack's a cloud environment, it's an open source environment, lets you deploy in a open manner that's completely portable with no vendor lock-in. And that's something where you can scale up, scale down. There's a little bit of investment, but at least you have some autonomy and portability.
Yeah. You were nodding away.
Yeah, well, you've kind of opened the door. Once you've done that, you've opened the door to flexibility with the clouds as well, where you can own that base of infrastructure, which we still, you own the infrastructure that you're using every day, but then you can spike out into AWS, into Google, into IBM software, into Rackspace or whatever, into those cloud services, which again builds more flexibility in the system, which might help solve, because the problem obviously with the decrease in revenue, I read the same report, is the fact that how do you squeeze out some of the costs, and being able to flexibly use the cloud is probably one way of doing it, although it doesn't help your budgeting question, because obviously that's a completely flexible bill as well.
The TV industry has always been quite a proprietary space. I mean, even today, IP is great because it's a universal transport layer. And we're seeing it with open standards bodies, and the standards bodies are absolutely great. But even in this space, software-defined networking is different depending on which vendor you happen to talk to.
Yep.
Network feature virtualization is different depending on which vendor you talk to.
Yep.
For a customer who has traditionally bought stacks, we're with vendor X or we're with vendor Y, they've gone from the camera to the playout, all with maybe two companies. And now entering a world where to do these different things, there are often, you guys do a lot of end-to-end, but there are often choices to make.
Absolutely.
And putting stuff together. As an industry, how are we doing at making all our next generation data center and network technologies work together? Are we A+, are we B-? Are we, as an industry, helping our customer, or are we helping ourselves?
So I could take a stab on that. So I'm part of the Advanced Media Workflow Association, and they've been doing a lot of work with the European Broadcasting Union. And we put together a framework called the Framework for Interoperable Media Services. which is really a way to standardize the interfaces to media services that we all use, transcode, repository, data moving, QC. And to be honest, it's a great idea, but it's gotten very little uptake. And from a customer perspective, it's a really good thing because I'm not locked into a proprietary API. Transcode is transcode is transcode. It runs wherever it runs, and I invoke it, monitor it, and change its parameters in a standardized way. So everybody here is going to agree that broadcast is built on standards, right? It's been, everybody knows what a BNC connector is, and a F connector, and an RC connector, and whatever. And they're the same things, analogy in the IT world, right? Most of the successful deployments in IT are built on open standards like TCP/IP and everything else. But as an industry, we've been very poor at adopting standards to just do simple things like invoke services. There's a framework. There's no license fee to it. There's no registration fee. It's completely free to anybody to use, and yet there's very little uptake.
Jack, do your customers say, we want standards, we demand standards?
Yeah, not only they demand, but they implement them. So I'll give you a quick example is that we deploy systems everywhere, and usually we send a system engineer from our Singapore office, our US office, and from Europe. And when we get a new project, the system engineer is elected, so he gets the project, he's very happy, but he's a little bit worried. Okay. And first he asks, is it going to be IPTV or OTT? Okay. And if you say OTT, it's like, well, okay, fine, so I'm good. So it's already getting there because the IPTV project with RTSP, they used to be very complex, and the set-top box integration, and the CAS, the conditional access. Now if you look at an OTT project, with HTTP, with the DRM, it's much simpler to implement. So we are already getting the benefit of the standardization of the HTTP. And if you look at virtualization and how they get to the standard and everything, I believe that our customers are not waiting for standards anymore. They're doing it, and they're asking you, they're asking you for OpenStack support. They're asking you for a VMware virtual machine. They're asking you for a KVM1. They're asking you for a Docker, implementation. So they are already getting there. I remember that when I started working, I was an engineer, and they would give me a stack of standards. They would tell me, spend 3 weeks on this, and when you're done, you can start working. But now, today, you don't need it. Anybody going out of school is an IT engineer, and he can manage already, any deployment. So it's already simpler, I think.
Jason, who's driving it? Is it the technical operations guys saying, make my life easier, I want this? Or is it the guys up above saying, strip some cost out of this, we don't care how you do it? Where is the driver coming from?
It's a really interesting question. I'm not sure I know the answer, but I mean, the standardization is interesting, and I think there's a race to standards as well right now. There's a lot of people doing different. It's the old VHS Betamax thing, which obviously this industry knows more than anyone. Is the fact that there does seem to be. There's lots of. We've had some involvement with the Open Compute projects rather, which is they got people like Facebook and stuff trying to create de facto new standards. Facebook and Google, which are players that you wouldn't even think of creating standards.
Facebook, that well-known networking company.
Yeah, exactly.
Who have their own networking switch.
Exactly.
Yes.
They have the wedge switch, which is something we've been experimenting, testing with. And so, there's a race on right now. So yes, I'm not sure, but I'm sure everybody would like it to be standardized, both at the bottom and the top, because obviously there's cost flexibility if you're writing the checks, and obviously if you're trying to program something and set up a network, then some standardization has got to help.
When you speak to your guys, are the techies in love with you and want that new technology, or is it their bosses that are signing the checks?
I think the techies like it, but really what they're worried about is being able to respond to their bosses. That's what they want. If a boss says to them, the thing's not working and you need to fix it, they want to be able to fix it. At that point, they don't really care about FIMS. They just want a telephone and somebody who's going to fix it for them. But the bosses, what they don't like is being locked into vendors.
Yep.
And I think that's what the FIMS thing really should be looking at. Sometimes the lock-in that vendors apply is just absurd.
Yep.
And it gets to a point where you say, this isn't even helping you,
Yep.
to lock somebody in so absurdly like this. And I think that's one of the things we find is when we're looking at projects with clients, it's just how can I avoid that that knife to the throat.
Yep.
They really don't like it at all. How can I avoid that? And if it's avoided with FIMS, then wonderful. I think for the development people though, FIMS is on the list, but there's all feature sets that people are prepared to pay for. And when they're making decisions about development,
Yep.
and it's, are we going to put FIMS in, or are we going to put in this extra feature that's going to get some extra revenue, it's clear which one is going to win.
But broadcasters have never wanted to become software developers. It's never been in their DNA but they're increasingly being forced to in some ways through apps and
Yeah.
new types of content that the app doesn't exist, so let's go out and build it. In the next generation data center, is there going to be more requirement for developers to get involved? That seems almost counterintuitive. Is it going to be service providers? Not to label you, but is it going to be service? Are they going to build it? Are they going to buy it? Is it going to be a combination of both? Are they going to rent it? Are they going to have the skills in-house? It's a magical moment for the industry, but there are a lot of questions. A lot of questions. Build or buy? Are you guys build or... If you say to your customers and they say, we want this thing, do you say build or do you say buy?
Well, there's never a right answer for build and buy. There isn't, because it
on what
all
it is.
depends completely on the circumstances, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if you look at automobiles, there are so many analogies that you can look at if you want to understand what's likely to happen with this industry. There are many, many examples, and automotive industries are the same. I mean, you say make or buy for a car manufacturer, and exactly the same criteria with two manufacturers. One will say, well, clearly it's make, and the other will say, well, clearly it's buy, because there are so many things behind it that make it, including how much access they have to capital. Yeah. I mean, there's one thing that I think is really fascinating, and how broadcasters are moving towards OpEx, and they say, well, the data center allows us to use OpEx. And in the very first days of your MBA, when you're studying MBA, they say, if you want to make a really long-term sustainable business, you need a lot of capital, and you need to put it in there so that other people can't get at you. And you think, hang on a minute, if the broadcasters aren't spending capital, if they're spending OpEx, who's spending the capital and getting the return on it? And that more financial aspect, if you like, of the movement in the industry is, again, something we don't really think about. And you think, who's got access to an awful lot of capital these days? And it isn't broadcasters, and it isn't vendors, it's Facebook, and it's Google.
Yep.
Well, that segues to my pet topic, which is the telcos. The telco space is very, very interesting for me, because these guys have the most vested of interest in deploying SDN and the next generation data center technologies. But they're also becoming broadcasters in their own right.
Absolutely.
And content aggregators.
Yep.
You have customers that are in this space. I mean, there are lots of telcos on this planet. Are they a different kettle of fish when you're having these discussions about the next generation of the data center? Are they thinking about the problem in a different way, a better way?
I mean, it's a threat to that industry as well. The SDN one is an interesting thing for the telco industry, because if you think about SDN, if the traditional networking model was, I'd go to a network provider and buy this private cloud type solution for my networking. And now, with SDN, when you're looking outside of the data center, but connecting data centers, the SDN allows them to buy, a second from this guy, second from this guy, second from this guy, second from this guy, wherever's the cheapest on a certain geographical link, but then manage it as a whole using an SDN platform. So there's a threat there to the network service providers, as well as a potential for, hey, if they get into managing this space, then actually that's a great, and you see carriers, I come from a carrier background, so know that one well. So you see some carriers are really beginning to kind of tiptoe over that line. They realize they're kind of cannibalizing their existing revenue, but still they kind of got to get there, because that's the future, because it's going to be that flexible networking. It's networking on demand, so to speak.
Do you see there'll be a day where there's sort of a true standard like IP, where we don't think of it as silo, 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 silo. It's like IP. Everything interconnects. Doesn't matter which vendor you buy. Is that a utopian dream, or is it actually something we're going to see anytime soon?
It's really interesting. I mean,
I believe it's happening. I believe it's happening already, like for service providers. So they build a private cloud, and then they wonder, so they deploy everything, the transcoding, the CDN, the CMS. They're able to change pieces. They are able also to upgrade the system so that they can deliver, some services faster. But when they come to disaster recovery, they feel like, do I really want to build a second private cloud, or do I want to put in Equinix, in a data center? And so they're already leveraging this. So they're doing the elasticity between their private cloud, the public cloud. when they're doing also going off-net, for example. So if they have their footprint and they want to go off-net, they feel like, am I really going to negotiate all these transit agreements and everything, or should I just deploy this into a public cloud? So they're already leveraging this, and even if all the interfaces are not standard-based, because we use mainly HTTP protocol for everything that is related to video delivery or transcoding or from a packager to an edge or anything, it's already basically interconnected, so very close to being interconnected.
That is a very positive view. I'm not disagreeing with you. I think you're right that because there is so much vested interest across the entire broadcast ecosystem in getting this stuff just to work together, it does seem that vendors are promoting a commonality. And if you look at the show like NAB, every year there's an acquisition of a big traditional hardware company acquiring a small software company.
True,
And that seems to be the way. So we came towards the end of our time. I can ask about the future. So we're talking about the future anyway, but let's go even further into the future. What will this all mean? We're going to a world where 4K is going to be the norm. We're going to a world where devices are going to be served up content wherever you are over LTE broadcast networks. Do we have to do something? If you're a traditional operator, broadcaster, and you're looking at this future and you haven't talked about SDN or network feature virtualization or virtualization, are you just putting your head in the clouds and waiting for the fall? Is there a plan B?
I mean, I would say you're right. I mean, looking into the future, if you're not involved now, looking at even the simplest things as virtualization and using IP and software-defined networks, you're just an ostrich sticking your head in the ground, and there's no recovery from that. And the companies that are, positioning themselves to take advantage of, riding that IT technology curve, taking advantage of those standards, they're the ones who are going to be successful. I mean, that's my opinion. I think they have to do something.
Just think about when you build bridges. If you made them as solid as concrete, the wind comes along and the bridge breaks or it falls apart. There needs to be some flexibility. In buildings in San Francisco, you've got to create that flexibility to roll with this stuff. There's so much disruption going on.
Yes.
If you're a rigid, solid system, you're going to break.
Yep.
You're just going to snap.
So agility is going to be the key.
Exactly.
Yep.
Okay. So we have an audience, experts on the stand, taking their time. Any questions? Yay! I'm going to buy you a beer. Dills?
Question too.
Dilly, the lady of the
got a strong
mic,
voice.
is winging her way towards you. You always have trouble getting people to ask questions. I think people are embarrassed about asking a bad question. There are no bad questions, just bad answers.
That's right.
My question is with the panel. A lot of complex technologies are already there in the data center, and by deploying the SDN, don't you think we are adding another complex system in the data center?
So let me paraphrase. So the question was that, are we adding more complexity into the data center by looking at some of these technologies?
How mature is the SDN?
Or how mature are these technologies?
Yes.
Oh, that's a good point. So, yeah, how mature are these technologies to be bringing them into the data center at this point? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's, and what about the security and the bugs which will be there? And a simple bug can ruin the life.
Well, what I will say, we'll skip on the security question because that is an entire panel by itself. But let's talk about maturity. Are these technologies actually ready for broadcast production workloads? Things like OpenStack, things like ACI, things like, the list goes on.
I think they are getting used by some of the largest service providers today, like Comcast doing some transcoding in the cloud, some other operators in Europe are already also doing that in the private cloud. So yeah, it's pretty much mature and deployed. So
what isn't mature? If we know that there are parts, what parts would you say are still maybe not broadcast ready that would be considered as next gen technologies?
I would say there's a space for anybody who's looking for ideas for doing new development. I'd say there's a space that's in the management layer between unplanned demand, so sudden peaks in demand, and the ability to automatically make your network respond to that irrespective of what devices are, what the geographies are, and things like that. I think there's probably a real lack of maturity of products there.
Automation and orchestration layer is still weak.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and it also gets to the fact of like almost a dynamic catalog of devices, right? You bring up a really good point, because it's not only responding to some issue and then automatically handling it, it's being able to know what devices you have available that can fill the gap, right? and devices come and go, virtually, right? So having that catalog that can pinpoint, these resources are available to me now to plug this hole, and I can fire them up. I think that is a true area that needs to be developed.
Any more questions? We've got a couple minutes. There is beer available. I'm not bribing you, I'm encouraging you. Any questions at all? That man is definitely a red wine.
Can I trade the beer for wine?
Anything you want, long as it's red.
All right. It's much more specific question about SDN is very general, but as far as open standards, open flow, and pretty much what other vendors trying to push their own proprietary SDN standards, or how you see that playing in the mid long term? We're going to be more open flow, allowing other devices, and taking.
So I'm going to paraphrase that question, and I'll see if I get this right. So you're right. There are half a dozen standards around the SDN frameworks, from vendors that are sometimes friends, sometimes enemies, sometimes working together, and there is no single SDN standard. So the paraphrase of the question is that situation going to get better or worse?
I think we'll have a few out there for a while. I mean, OpenFlow kind of grew out of some of the Stanford research originally, I believe. And I was at Stanford last week at their Compute Forum, and they're coming out with the next kind of generation of that. And it's like, well, you brought that one out, and now you've got another new idea. So it does still seem to be a moving target. I mean, there is some standardization going on, things like OpenFlow, I think. But still, I think we're at the very front end of it.
The optimist says it's getting better, the pessimist shakes their head. Do you think it's getting better?
I think it may be getting better. I think the big carriers are going to help, drive that, because they're reaching a point of, frustration. Yeah. So I think they're the ones who are going to be the catalyst that solve that problem. Okay,
that's a fair point. Okay, if there's no more beer or wine-related questions, I think we're going to call it a day. So I'm going to just say thank yous. Jacques Lemanque from Broadpeak, Mike Beattie from Mediamano, Jason Sherwood from Equinix, and Peter Gigliamino from IBM. Thank you.